All right, hey, how's it going? Let's just get this started. React to video on the Ukraine war, get a little bit of update on it, in case you guys aren't aware. That's still going on. It's been going on. There's been a lot of narratives over the years about Ukraine not standing a chance, that they should just give up, that we should support them. But if you've been paying a little bit of attention, they've actually been embarrassing Russia for a while now. So I saw a little bit of this guy's videos, or this guy's video on this particular conflict, and I thought I paused it and I was like, you know what, let me save it for React because I feel like it's a pretty good video to kind of summarize what's been going on. And also, you know what, I've seen a few of his videos and I just subscribed to his channel. You should subscribe to his channel, by the way. This is Patrick Boyle. From what I've seen, I think he does pretty good videos in terms of like, you know, researching a topic and actually kind of getting into the nitty gritty on it. And then we're going to watch another video by Legal Eagle about America 250, the very sad failed anniversary of our country, unfortunately, under the incapable hands of Donald Trump has kind of spoiled it, but I'll save that. And then if we have time, we'll get to a debate between Destiny and George Santos, the disgraced Republican congressman. And I saw a little bit of that debate, and Destiny really laid him out. It's a really good example of how to actually debate and dominate as you know, as a liberal in these on these topics. So, anyways, let's get started with this video. This is on Ukraine and Russia war.
In early July 2026, Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak got on a video call with Vladimir Putin to deliver the kind of update you really don't want to be delivering to Vladimir Putin. Despite the Kremlin's public insistence that everything in Russia is running with a substantial margin of resilience, Novak had to announce an immediate ban on diesel exports running through July 31st. This, you have to understand, is particularly embarrassing for Russia because geologically speaking, Russia is mostly made of oil and it markets itself as an energy superpower.
So, you know, understand the implications of that, right? You have Russia that is desperate for oil. It's short on oil. That shouldn't be a thing because Russia, one of its biggest exports is oil. So that should already cause like a red flag, or not really a red flag, but it should cause some alarm bells to go off in your head and kind of make you go, okay, what's going on there? That's unusual.
Novak went on to say that Russia would start importing refined fuel from abroad, including emergency gasoline shipments from India. For anyone who remembers 2003,
I didn't even know India produced a lot of oil.
Energy. Mohammed Saeed al-Sahaf stood in front of the cameras at the start of the Iraq War, insisting that American troops weren't anywhere near Baghdad, while the tanks rolled past behind him on live TV. Russian state TV has assembled its own version of the format. On air, troops are advancing confidently along the front line. Off air, in Moscow and in roughly half of the country's regions, drivers are queuing for hours for a ration daily allowance of fuel. If you just stayed inside...
I had a friend that I was talking to at the beginning of 2025. We were discussing the whole Trump thing, and there was a conversation about the Ukraine and Russia war, and kind of like this idea about sometimes a nation needs a strong leader was kind of the perspective that she had, that, you know, democracy, it doesn't always deliver, and sometimes, you know, a nationalist leader kind of, you know, does what he needs to do, whatever, with Putin being the example. And, you know, I told her at the time, like, you know, I don't know if you're consuming memes online, but Russia's economy has actually been struggling since the start of the Ukraine war, and this is kind of like news to her. I don't think she really believed it. And I think a lot of people don't believe it because of the propaganda that comes out of Russia. But I've been aware of this for a while, that Russia's been experiencing a lot of economic struggles and strains due to their commitment to the war that they can't really, they can't actually support. They don't really actually have the economy to support it. They sell a lot of bluster online. There's a lot of propaganda that gets pushed out online. Oh, you need a nationalist leader. They're so effective. They make the trains run on time. Problem with nationalist leaders and nationalist movements is they're so crazed about themselves, they're so full of themselves, they're so hyped up on their, like they're so high on their own supply that they'll do things that are stupid, detrimental to their own country. I mean, we're seeing that here in the United States. And they're really good at selling an image of competence and confidence, and they know what they're doing, and they love their country, and they're doing the best for their country. But, and this goes for your personal life as well. When you are too full of yourself, when you've gone past the point of confidence and you're in the realm of arrogance and self-delusion, you know, without that check and balance that you have in the back of your head that's saying, hey, you know, am I doing something right? You know, hey, maybe I need to pump my brakes. Hey, you know, this isn't really working out. Maybe I need to try a different angle. Maybe I need to reconsider what I'm doing. When you're so full of yourself, you're probably going to double down on things that are going to be detrimental to your country. And that's the case with Russia. The interesting thing is, well, he's going to get into it a little bit. I'll wait till he gets to that point in the video.
Watch TV, you'd believe that all is well. The managing of appearances runs to the top. In May, Russia held its annual Victory Day parade, the big red square affair that Putin uses to project military strength. This year, for the first time in nearly 2 decades, there was no military hardware in it. No tanks, no missile launchers.
Realizing that they're short on military equipment because they can't deploy it in their parade is indicative that their military equipment is getting destroyed on the battlefield. And I remember months back, I talked about it on my channel, that I think it was something like 60% of the military hardware is getting decimated. This information that really doesn't get reported in the media in the United States because our media is so incompetent and gets led around rather than being proactive about reporting the information that, you know, Americans, that's relevant to the American population. But they're getting decimated. And, you know, Russia was supposed to be at one point in time, a global superpower to rival the United States. They're supposed to be the next strongest country with all this military hardware and technology that it, you know, comes the closest to rivaling the United States. And here they are getting their military equipment destroyed by a country that they thought they were going to roll over, a country that was, you know, for all intents and purposes, more of a developing country. So that's a pretty big deal.
Just soldiers and a flyover, because rolling your strategic hardware slowly through an open square is unwise when the other side has drones that reach Moscow. Ukraine had drones over the capital that same week, so Putin got himself a guarantee. Zelensky issued a formal decree declaring Red Square off limits to Ukrainian strikes for the duration of the parade, publishing helpfully the exact coordinates in exchange for a prisoner swap, 1,000 from each.
Okay, hold on a second. I didn't catch that. Kremlin spokesperson reassured Moscovites, so Moscow, right? People live in Moscow. That's another thing too. Like, Moscow is the capital of Russia. And Ukraine has managed not only to fend off the Russians from taking over more and more of their territory, they've stalled them on the battlefield, but Ukraine is now destroying infrastructure within Russia. Russia is getting their shit pushed in their own country. In Moscow has been bombed. There was a photo from a little while back. Moscow bombed. Boom, bombed. Moscow bombed. Look at this. There's a particular, this image right here, this is the one I was looking for. Look at this. That's crazy. That's Moscow. That's Russia. That's not Ukraine. That's Russia getting their shit pushed in by the Ukrainians. That's pretty crazy.
Side. The man who invaded to restore Russian greatness held his greatness parade with his enemies.
And that's the interesting thing is I think we're actually seeing the decline of Russia as a superpower. Like, I think Ukraine will be the nail in the coffin historically that will mark the turning point where Russia was like definitively no longer a global superpower. Russia under Putin has been this huge threat for decades and decades. And now Putin is basically, he's blown his load, so to speak, in Ukraine, and he's destroying his own regime from the inside.
Written permission. The Kremlin called the decree a silly joke, which it was, though possibly not in the way that they meant. The cause of these shortages is no mystery. Ukraine has moved the center of gravity of the war away from the trenches of the Donbass.
See, since 2025, Ukraine's drone-fronted forces have been killing and seriously wounding Russian soldiers faster than the Kremlin can recruit them, slowing their advance to a crawl, or in some cases, even slightly reversing it. And I mean, another thing to mention too is that the Russian people have weathered a lot of strife to support the regime and everything that it's done so far, but that can really only go so far. And if you just have constantly Russian soldiers getting killed left and right, if you have infrastructure in Russia getting destroyed, Russians themselves getting bombed by the Ukrainians, there's going to be a lot of internal discomfort, so to speak. And then another thing worth mentioning about this too is that we have to consider that the Ukraine war is a turning point for modern warfare. We're seeing the rise of drone warfare fundamentally reshape the way the battlefield looks. We can no longer rely on the conventional military equipment that we used to have in the past because drones are cheap, they're hard to track, they're hard to, target, blow out of the air, but they're really good at getting into small spaces, getting into areas, blowing up areas, destroying infrastructure, killing people.
And into Russia's refineries. Using drones that can fly 1,400 kilometers into Russian territory, Ukraine has taken out somewhere around a third of the country's oil refining capacity. Kiev's own
a third. That's massive. That's crazy. I didn't realize that. So, I mean, I know they've been bombing Russian oil infrastructure, but that's crazy. That's massive.
Staff claims the number is closer to 43%.
Ooh.
Independent energy analysts land nearer to a third, but either way, it's enough to get you rationed at your own gas stations in a country that exports.
Then see, that's the other thing too. You're not only having Russian soldiers being killed, you're not only having Russian civilians having their infrastructure and their homes bombed, you're having now them have to suffer like economic consequences of higher gas prices. That's going to trickle to everything else in their economy because the modern economy runs off of fuel, so it's going to affect them in their pocketbook as well.
Exports oil for a living. And it isn't only refineries. Over the summer, Ukraine widened the campaign to the thing Putin prizes most. Crimea, annexed in 2014, and until recently, the one piece of occupied territory where Russians could sunbathe and pretend the war was somewhere else. That pretense is now over. After weeks of drone strikes on power substations, oil terminals, and the ferries that supply them.
And if you're not aware, prior to Russia's invasion into the current conflict of Ukraine, Russia had previously invaded into Crimea and taken over the Crimean territory. And so now the Ukrainians are starting to take that fight back to that territory that the Russians have previously conquered.
The peninsula, Russian-installed authorities declared a state of emergency indefinitely. Civilian petrol sales were halted outright and cities went dark. The air raid sirens, meanwhile, have been switched off, not because Crimea is safe. A senior local official explained that if they left the sirens on, they'd be sounding 22 hours a day, and nobody would get any sleep. Residents suspect that the real reason is simpler. A whaling siren is bad for the tourist season, so the beaches at Yalta stay...
Imagine being a tourist visiting Russia or Ukraine right now. That sounds crazy. I would never.
...full, while a short drive away, mobile air defense teams fire machine guns at drones over the rooftops. Tourists elsewhere on the peninsula spent their holidays stuck in traffic jams trying to flee over bridges that Ukraine has damaged but pointedly not destroyed. One analysis suggests that Kiev is leaving the last one standing on purpose as an exit.
It is a bit of a question whether or not civilian infrastructure, I mean, it's not really a question. It's my understanding that targeting civilian infrastructure is considered a war crime. But at the same time, I mean, some of that civilian infrastructure is also being used to supply the war effort so that it becomes a bit of a gray area, right?
The knock-on effects reach well past Crimea. To blunt the drones, Russian regions now routinely shut off mobile networks and mobile internet, which also, as it happens, switches off the card readers and the cash machines. So a drone alert 3 regions away can leave you unable to buy a coffee. And because there aren't enough air defense systems to cover everything at once, Moscow has to choose what to protect. It's been photographed lowering Panzer missile systems by helicopter onto the roofs of Moscow apartment blocks, pulling cover off other sites to do it. This is what the parades are built to hide. A country that invaded its neighbor to project strength now can't reliably keep the lights on in the territory it invaded for, and is rationing its air defenses between its own capital and its own oil refineries. A war that the Kremlin assumed would wrap up over a long weekend.
And I mean, if you are spending those resources having to defend your own territory, you have to imagine that your ability to, invade someone else's territory is greatly diminished, right? You can't really do both at the same time. You have to either defend your own territory or you have to, send troops out beyond your territory. But if they're out beyond your territory, you're unguarded, you're undefended, right?
Has now run longer than the First World War, with no end in sight. The numbers behind it are...
It's so crazy to think about because, we look back at World War I, World War II, and those are like the biggest, greatest wars in our imagination. And it's interesting to think that this conflict has now stretched on longer than that war.
Compute. CSIS puts Russian battlefield casualties, dead, wounded, and missing, at approximately 1.4 million people between February 2022.
I'm curious, too. What is the, we're talking, in this case, we're referring to battlefield casualties. I wonder how many total casualties. Ukraine war. I'm curious what the number is on the Ukrainian side. So we have a number of casualties. Territorial changes. I thought they usually list this somewhere right here. How many casualties in Ukraine war on both sides? Okay. So 14,000 military and civilian deaths during the war in Donbass. Between 1.27 million and 2 million killed and wounded during the Russian invasion in Ukraine. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. Russian. Okay, let's look down here. So, Ukrainian forces, we have 4,000 casualties. Wait, what the hell? Well, he's saying in this video 1.4 million. So why are the numbers so low here? What's going on here? Am I reading this incorrectly? Oh, that's the war in Donbass. Okay, let's scroll down a little bit. Okay, the present conflict. So we have Ukrainian civilians, 12,000. That's sad. 16,000 are captive. The Russians aren't treating them well. Russian civilians, okay, there's a lot less Russian civilians that are killed. And when we talk about forces, we have 200,000 killed on the Ukrainian side. And we have about 500,000 killed on the Russian side. Now, you have to consider like the population differences between these two countries. I'm sure it's wide. I'm not going to look it up right now, but Russia probably has a much larger population. So it's worth considering what is the percentage of their total population that they're losing. It's probably safe to say that the Ukrainians are losing a larger percentage of their population. But nonetheless, it's still going to really hurt the Russians to be having this amount of losses.
And June 2026, including up to 450,000 deaths. Russia has lost more soldiers in Ukraine than the United States has lost in every war combined since 1945, 4 times over. I came across a recent story about Russia rejecting the US claim that Ukrainian strikes inside Russia could help bring the war to an end. What's interesting is that different outlets framed the same remarks in very different ways. One high factuality source emphasized the Kremlin's claim that Ukrainian attacks would only extend the covering it. Ground News, PB, or economy was booming. This year, even the official government spreadsheets disagree. According to a June 2026 report from the Kiel Institute, the Russian economy contracted 0.3% in the first quarter, despite the government sharply ramping up spending. Moscow has cut its own 2026 growth forecast to 0.4%. That is not a typo, 0.4%.
So they're like solidly in not depression, but recession at the very least.
A government that spent the last 4 years describing sanctions as basically decorative. The economist Torbjorn Becker describes it as a two-track economy. To keep inflation under control, Russia's central bank has held rates above 14%, while the government keeps pouring rubles into defense with the other hand. It's the macroeconomic equivalent of flooring the accelerator with the brakes locked on. The engine screams, the civilian economy chokes on the borrowing costs, and the car doesn't go any faster. Russia is not collapsing, not dramatically, and not on a schedule anyone could put a date on. The Kiel Institute's term for what's going on is structural exhaustion, which is a nice way of saying that the economy is running on fumes. They report that Russia's pre-war fiscal buffers are almost entirely spent, and the state is now engaged in a dangerous game of under-the-table financial engineering to keep its war machine from seizing up. It's not just Russian citizens who are expected to buy into the televised alternate reality. For the last few years, a strange pattern has emerged where certain Western commentators look at modern Russia and see a highly cohesive traditionalist paradise.
You know, I've seen a lot of that. Well, on the right, you see that because Putin has sold Russia as kind of like the right-wing fever dream. You know, he sells it as like, you know, they got Orthodox Christianity, and he'll put images in the internet of like these all-white families, and, you know, he's conservative, anti-LGBT. So they look to Russia like, oh, we want a strong leader, kind of like that. We want to return to tradition like Russia's doing, but like country's not doing very strong. It's not doing very hot right now. On the flip side, I have seen some commentators on the left making excuses for Russia, or at least like downplaying the case for supporting the Ukrainians, because they have like this black and white anti-war perspective where the United States should never get involved in anything. I don't think those commentators are trying to glaze Russia necessarily. I think they just don't want the US to be involved. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a mistake for a variety of reasons.
They managed to look past the military draft, the collapsing infrastructure, and the rampant corruption, and see instead a spiritually unified nation bravely standing up to Western decadence. The highest profile example is when the YouTuber Tucker Carlson took a pilgrimage to Moscow in 2024 to interview Vladimir Putin. In the video, Carlson rode the subway, admired the decor at the train station, and visited an upscale growth.
All the things that I'm saying right now, I mean, I would love to visit Russia. The reason I say this is because it's a place with a lot of history. They have a lot of interesting architecture. I just don't see myself visiting it anytime soon with Putin in charge. I mean, I don't know when, if ever, will be a time where it'll be safe for me to travel into a country like that. But it is really sad because as much as I hate these leaders and these movements and everything, the average person in any civilization is usually going to be typically a pretty decent person. And it's sad that Russia is under the control of a, you know, deranged lunatic. There was a time period in the 90s where it looked like there was a potential for Russian civilization to move more westward and be kind of integrated into the global, community. And I mean integrated in the sense that they are a team player, that they get along, that they're not seen as like a crazy state that people have to be afraid of. But, you know, that's not the history that wound up happening. So, I mean, it'd be really nice if someday things go in a bit more positive direction. I could actually visit that country, but it's probably going to get a little bit worse before it ever gets better.
Grocery store, where he priced out a week shopping at $104 against the roughly $400 he and his crew guessed it would cost back home. He came away, in his own words, radicalized against American leadership.
Tucker Carlson's such an incredibly obvious propagandist. Like, he went over there in order to sell the line for the Russian government, and probably for the same reason that a lot of right-wingers glaze Russia, because in his mind, it's like the kind of society he likes, right? Just like a lot of right-wingers do, which is this nationalistic society with a strong authoritarian leader, no LGBT stuff, no woke stuff, XYZ, so on and so forth. I think it's easy sometimes for people to look at him and think that, I don't know, like either he's dumb or he's just someone who has a anti-establishment perspective. No, he knows what he's doing. He's a propagandist for these authoritarian nationalist type of movements.
That's how I feel anyway, radicalized.
This grocery store diplomacy is not historically a new thing. In 1989, Boris Yeltsin visited a supermarket in Houston and was so stunned by the shelves of pudding cups and the total absence of a bread line that he went home and helped dismantle the Soviet Union. 35 years later, an American walked into a Russian supermarket and had the exact opposite reaction. Progress, it turns out, runs in both directions, provided that you only ever visit the flagship store. Now, it's not that unusual for Americans abroad to notice that the bread is.
I notice that people kind of do this with China too. China is real eager to push this perspective as well, where they'll invite people to come. They'll put tourist propaganda out there, kind of selling people on their most advanced, developed cities, which, again, don't get me wrong, there are nice parts of China. Definitely a country I'd like to visit. I don't really have a fear of visiting China at this point because they're not run by crazy people like Russia is. But you know, one thing to consider is that if you go to like the Chinese countryside, or if you go outside of some of those touristy destinations, there's still a lot of parts of China that are developing. And that's not to say, by the way, the United States doesn't have the problems that we have. We have a lot of wealth disparity too in the United States. It is just to say, though, that, you know, don't buy into the propaganda that China is all hunky-dory and sparkly and brand new and everything's fine over there. They have their own issues to deal with. They have, like, you know, the treatment of their working class is pretty dystopian. And you would think for a country that's trying to move towards kind of like a communistic style society where everyone kind of has an equal, you know, share of the pie, so to speak. At least as they exist right now, there is stratification there as well.
It's better, and this is mostly because American bread is horrible. Had Carlson gone to Paris instead, he'd still be wearing a beret and a string of onions around his neck to this day. At the time, plenty of people pointed out that judging a country's macroeconomic health from a supermarket next to the foreign ministry is a bit silly. The conservative writer...
Yeah, it's the thing. I mean, if you're a tourist or you're visiting, go to the touristy areas, go to the nice areas, by all means, right? But if you're a political commentator, if you're trying to engage with geopolitics to get a holistic view of a country, you can't just visit the nicest areas and then extrapolate from that. You also can't just visit the, you know, like the worst areas and extrapolate from that either. You have to kind of take a more broader view, kind of the pros and cons.
Jonah Goldberg called the whole segment amazingly stupid and noted that...
But see, that's the thing. It's not stupid. Tucker knows this. He's not dumb. He understands that, you know, taking an anecdote from a government that wants you to go to this specific grocery store to check out this specific city, he knows that. He knows that's not a good representation of like what's going on across the entire country, but he did it because he was trying to push a narrative.
Russia, on a per capita basis, is about a fifth as wealthy as the United States, and that America's poorest regions are significantly wealthier than Russia. Russian GDP per capita...
Yeah, that's an interesting statistic to consider, and I think a lot of people just genuinely don't appreciate or understand that, again, because of the propaganda. Russian society, like, is genuinely pretty poor. Your average civilian living there
sits somewhere around $13,000 to $15,000, while the US number is north of 80,000. So of course, the bread is a bit cheaper in Russia. The traditional Christian values argument holds up about as well. Surveys show that religion plays an important role in the lives of about 15% of the Russian population. Significant...
That part I didn't know. I actually bought into the propaganda that the Russians were pushing, because I thought in my mind, like, okay, Putin's pushing this nationalist Orthodox Christian society. It seems like the Russian civilian population is, you know, cut off from the world in terms of the propaganda that's fed to them, that I could see them just kind of falling into that and everyone kind of goes along with it. I would have never guessed that the actual, you know, fervent religiosity in that country would actually be that low.
Lower than the equivalent US number, not higher. In fairness to Carlson, by the time he got to that Moscow supermarket, he'd already been through quite a lot. Sometime in 2023, by his own account, he was physically...
And it's also something to kind of consider, which is if, you know, fervent religiosity in that country is that low, why is it that the Russian government is projecting the image of the opposite, that it's a traditional, very religious, you know, country or whatever? Why are they doing that? Because they're trying to push that narrative specifically to the right wing in the United States. they're trying to push that propaganda line to Americans in the United States to sell them an image to, hey, that like this American open liberal culture that you have in the United States, you know, abandon that and come back to a type of society that's more like, you know, this nationalist, overly religious society that we're trying to project with our propaganda, thereby sowing division within the United States.
Physically attacked in his bed by a demon.
Yeah, by a demon.
Something that he didn't make public until a documentary interview released in late 2024.
I forgot about that.
In which he said that he woke with 4 bleeding claw marks across his...
I don't believe that either. See, like, that's another example of, I think, Tucker's saying stuff to appeal to a certain audience. I don't think he actually believes this.
His ribs.
I don't think he thinks that actually happened to him.
His words by something unseen.
I went and flipped on the light in the bathroom, and I had 4 claw marks on either side underneath my arms and on my left shoulder.
Wow, that's crazy.
And they're bleeding.
No way.
Wait, they were bleeding?
They're bleeding, yeah. No actual claw marks. And I sleep on my side, so I wasn't clawing myself.
Yeah, totally, dude.
And they didn't fit my
That's
hand.
a crazy story.
That happened.
Now, this isn't a theology
Such an
channel,
obvious lie.
whatever the comments keep insisting, so we should probably consider the alternative explanations. And here we can turn, as we so often can, to Vladimir Putin. In his own autobiography, Putin tells a story about growing up in a St. Petersburg apartment block, where as a boy he once chased a large rat down a hallway with a stick. Now, to my younger viewers, this is what children did before they had mobile phones, in Russia anyhow. He cornered the rat, and then the rat, having nowhere left to go, turned around, lunged at his face, and chased him back into his parents' home. Hold on to that story because we'll need it for later. But for now, it's enough to note that between Russian municipal plumbing, the general absence of pest control, and a head of state with first-hand experience of large, aggressive rats indoors, there's a non-zero chance that the terrifying entity that Claude Tucker Carlson was, in fact, a rat, Occam's razor.
Oh, yeah, no, that happens. Yeah, people are attacked in their bed by demons. What?
Jesus Christ. I just don't even think it happened at all. I think he's just selling that line to appeal to a lot of these religious fundamentalists, to kind of appeal to this idea of like, oh, you know, our society, our civilization is being overrun by demons and you guys all need to be afraid. And, you know, the demons are all among us and everything. I think that's what it is, really.
What are you even talking about? Yeah.
The people falling for the Potemkin supermarket tour are making the same mistake as the people reading Russia's official GDP figures. They're looking at the display case and ignoring the foundations underneath it. If we actually want to understand how Russia is paying for the war, we need to stop admiring the bread and go back to the depleted sovereign wealth fund and the bankruptcy statistics instead. Once you do that, the numbers get bleak rather fast. Russia went into this war with a serious rainy day account. For years, the Kremlin had been funneling excess oil and gas revenue into its national wealth fund, a buffer built for exactly this kind of shock. At the start of the invasion...
I was going to say, they were probably intentionally doing that, knowing that they were preparing to invade some of these post-Soviet countries. If you ever played a game called Civilization, it's basically like a geopolitical game. You're leading a country basically, and you have to like build up resources, build towns, build cities, engage in diplomacy, build wealth, all that good stuff. Engaging in war in that game is incredibly resource demanding, and so like the game requires you. And I like that it does this because it puts you in the mindset of how things might actually go if you're running a country in real life, where you can't just on the flip of a dime decide you want to go to war. It costs a lot of money. It zaps a lot of resources. It takes away from other production that you could be doing with your country. And so they were building up that wealth fund for a long time, probably for this specific goal in mind.
That fund's liquid assets sat at 6.5% of GDP. As of this April, they're down to 1.8%. The cushion is mostly gone. Without those savings, the government is burning cash at a rate that doesn't leave much room for maneuver. In the first 3 months of 2026 alone, Russia's budget deficit hit 4.6 trillion rubles. The official target for the entire year was 3.8 trillion, so they blew through their 12-month credit limit in 90 days. So, piggy bank empty, official budget already blown, how are they keeping the lights on in the tank factories? Well, by moving the cost off the books. The economist Matthew Klein, drawing on research by Craig Kennedy, lays out the basic arithmetic. Military spending is up and oil and gas revenue is down.
Fun piece of history knowledge is that when Hitler and the Nazis, first kind of started engaging in war, they actually took out a lot of debt in order to fund the war machine. I think a lot of people don't know this. And they were relying on the annexation of new territory as they moved through country to country, and stealing the resources and using the labor of these territories that they took over to try to make up for the debt that they were accumulating. But I think, towards the end of the war and everything, like it was basically unsustainable. And so I think sometimes people look at the Nazis and they think like, oh, they were so strong, they were so powerful. How did they manage to become so powerful so quick and take over so quick and everything? Well, yeah, they were operating on borrowed resources with the the weight of that leverage. When you take out loans and stuff, like you become over leveraged potentially if you take out more than you can handle. Like they were accumulating a lot of debt in order to keep that going. And even if things didn't really pan out the way that they ultimately did, there's probably a good possibility that things would have kind of run out for them anyways because of how over leveraged they had become.
And the shortfall has to come from somewhere. So it's coming from everywhere. Higher taxes, spending cuts, more borrowing, and the steady sale of reserve assets, including the national gold. An energy superpower is selling its gold to cover the fuel bill. On top of that, corporate debt has ballooned since the war began, driven largely by...
Keep that in mind. Not only are they accumulating public debt, so debt from the state itself, your private sector is also accumulating a lot of debt too. So, I mean, it'd be nice, I guess, if you could have a balance there. Like, okay, the debt from the public sector is getting kind of out of hand, but hey, at least our private sector is chugging along pretty nicely. Nope. Both sides of the economy are struggling.
State-controlled banks being ordered to flood military-related companies with cheap credit. The Kremlin has effectively commandeered the banking system to do through the back door what the budget can't do openly.
By the way, this can only really pencil out if... I don't even know if they could actually pencil out if they manage to take over the Ukraine, but that's the idea anyways. But it doesn't look like they stand a chance of actually accomplishing that goal. So they're going to be left at the end of this not being able to actually take over any of this territory. Meanwhile, they've kind of collapsed their economy to do so.
And the state keeps these firms afloat by letting them simply not pay their bills. The government is sitting on a mountain of uncollected taxes and fees from the corporate sector, debt by any other name, just filed under a friendlier head.
I'm curious, I don't know if he mentioned it, but I wonder what the inflation rate is in Russia right now. Russia inflation rate. Because this is a lot of extra, like excess demand chasing a, not as much supply. Russia's annual inflation rate accelerated 6% in June 2026. And I wonder if this is their numbers. The 5-month high was primarily driven by a fuel supply shock and a 19.9 spike in motor gasoline prices resulting from Ukrainian drone strikes on oil. Okay. Annual inflation stood at 8.7 at the close of 2025, down from 8.43 in 2024 and 13.74 in 2022. But I wonder where this number's coming from, because if these are their numbers, I don't think we could trust their numbers at all at this point.
It's
not that we ever could in the first place.
Letting a failing shop skip rent indefinitely, and the shop owner using the money he didn't pay in rent to declare a record year. It works on a spreadsheet for a while, but eventually somebody needs to come up with actual cash to stop the building falling down. The bill is arriving. Overdue enterprise debt has climbed sharply, and a meaningful share of all corporate debt is now flagged as problem loans. For a growing number of large Russian firms, the annual interest bill is bigger than their entire annual EBITDA, which means that the businesses are losing money at the raw operating level before you even get to the taxman or asset depreciation. At that point, company is a generous word for what you're looking at. It's an org chart standing on top of an invoice someone else is going to have to pay. Unfortunately for Moscow, the shock that finally tips this over isn't coming from the West. It's coming from their most important ally. Days before the full-scale invasion, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping signed a joint statement declaring a no-limits partnership. To a casual observer, that reads like two geopolitical heavyweights teaming up to rewrite the global financial system. But according to the economist Alicia Garcia Herrero, once you look at the actual trade data, this is by no means an alliance of equals. It's an increasingly lopsided.
China's really smart, and they've been really rational during this entire period of time. The United States is crashing out, Russia's crashing out, China's profiting off of all of it, and they've been like a very even-keeled geopolitical force, very rational, trying to basically keep the peace with everybody. I don't know what it looks like, going forward a few decades, a generation or two down the line. But if things were to keep going this way, I would imagine that this is a recipe for China surpassing these other powers, because it managed to kind of keep itself on a nice, steady, stable ship, building good relationships with other people, and getting other countries indebted to it itself.
Arrangement, and Russia is on the wrong end of it. China now accounts for roughly 35% of Russia's total foreign trade, up from 16% before the war, with European markets.
So now that means that Russia is pretty much dependent on China.
Closed, Russia has become a captive supplier, vast quantities of raw materials and one buyer able to take them at scale. Beijing knows exactly how much leverage this gives them. You can watch that leverage play out in real time with the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline, the project meant to redirect gas that used to flow to Europe straight into China. Putin flew to Beijing in May, specifically hoping to close the deal. He came home with more than 40 signed documents on everything from trade to nuclear security, and nothing at all on the pipeline. China is perfectly happy to let Russia sit there while it keeps squeezing the terms.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, China has all the cards now. China has them basically over a barrel. Russia it's going to have decreasing amount of geopolitical partners that are willing to kind of make deals with it, not only because it can't fulfill its obligations, financially, but it doesn't look as powerful as it used to in the past militarily. That was a reason a lot of countries used to kind of bow down and kiss up to it. Russia's military is getting its shit pushed in by Ukraine. They can't really manage to fight multi-pronged wars right now anyways, and their military just doesn't look as strong as it did before because of how Ukraine has made it look how easy it is to defeat the Russian military. And so that puts China in a really good position to be like, hey, you're kind of out of options, so you got to come to us now.
Russia takes a haircut on what it sells, it's becoming completely dependent on China for what it buys, particularly for the military. The Kremlin likes to talk about import substitution, replacing Western goods with domestic production. The customs data tells a very different story. Russia has mostly just swapped its European dependency for a Chinese one. Its military-industrial complex now relies on China for the majority of its critical dual-use technology, electronic components, CNC machine tools, the boring-sounding stuff that actually keeps a war economy running. The economist Konstantin Urgarov went digging through the Russians' custom records to see exactly how that works. Take microprocessors. In 2021, most of the chips entering Russia were made by American companies like Intel and AMD. Today, those same Western brands still make up the overwhelming majority of Russia's chip imports. The only thing that's changed.
That's insane. We shouldn't be supplying them with any microprocessors at all. I don't know why we're doing that. That's crazy.
Changed is the paperwork, which now routes the vast majority of them through China first. Beijing isn't replacing Western technology, it's charging a toll on it.
Oh, I wonder if that's what's going on. Because I would imagine that we would have an embargo on sales of microprocessors to Russia. That would make sense because it's basically flowing through a third party that doesn't have that restriction on it.
With ordinary consumer goods, China isn't bothering with the Middleman Act. It's just taking the market. Western appliance brands like Electrolux and Indesit have all but disappeared from Russian shelves, replaced almost entirely by Chinese-made equivalents. China hasn't offered Russia a no-limits friendship, it's giving them a very patient landlord. Moscow is burning through men and money to fight a war of attrition, and in the process, it's mortgaged its economy to Beijing. The realization that sanctions are leakier than advertised and that China is content to keep the Russian war machine running in exchange for discount oil has started to worry European capitals. They're waking up to the possibility of having to fight a land war without American backup. If you assumed that Europe waking up to the prospect of fighting wars without American backup was setting off champagne corks in the boardrooms of US defense contractors, you'd be wrong. Through early 2026, with the conflict in the Middle East grinding on and Washington increasingly distracted, European capitals started doing the previously unthinkable. They opened their wallets. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz took a match to decades of fiscal discipline and committed to borrowing more than 800 billion euros by 2030 to rebuild the military and the country's infrastructure. The target.
This is something I talked about before in some of my past videos, which is that the Europeans are looking to kind of hedge their bets on their long-standing allyship with the United States, because the United States is not a trustworthy partner anymore. And that's pretty scary, because as much as Americans want to pretend otherwise, the reality is that our geopolitical dominance over these decades has, in very large part, been a consequence of the relationships that we had with other countries and the military alliances that we've had. If we start losing all of these military partners, that really weakens our standing in the world.
Target is defense spending of 3.5% of GDP by 2029 from a country that was spending about 1.5% as recently as 2023. Logically,
the other scary thing too is we're seeing what? Russia engaged in war, Ukraine. They're also talking about, I think, I thought I read something the other day about potentially invading Poland. I don't even know how they can manage to facilitate something like that with everything they have going on right now. There's maybe the possibility of China trying to take over the South China Sea along with Taiwan. The United States is doing what it's doing, invading or having this war with Iran. You have the Europeans now increasing their defense spending. What does this look like if you zoom out and take kind of a longer term perspective? This looks like the world increasing its proclivity to war and the potential for war. And that's kind of how you see world wars get started. We like to, when we look at World War II, World War I, we see these things as like all of a sudden there's just war. Well, that's not the reality. When you look at those conflicts, you can look historically and see kind of the buildup of these tensions over time. And people don't really realize they're in it until they're actually in it. It's easy to identify when like a global conflict like that has happened in retrospect, but it's harder to see kind of the gradual buildup to it when you're in the moment.
The wealthiest nations on Earth, all rearming at once, should send defense stocks through the roof. Instead, in March 2026, the NYSE ARCA Defense Index fell nearly 8%, while the S&P 500 fell about 5%. The defense sector underperformed the broad market in the same month Europe announced the biggest rearmament since.
You know why that is, right? It's because historically, the European allies have relied a lot on, in other countries too, by the way, on our military technology. We would export that out. Well, they don't trust us anymore, and they don't really want to, they don't want to encourage and support our military machine, because we're talking about invading Greenland. We're talking about using our military against them. So why would they want to support that? So now they're pulling the amount of money that they would ordinarily spend on, on purchasing weapons, ammunition, defense platforms from the United States to trying to develop it domestically or sourcing it from somewhere else. That's my guess. He'll probably tell us right now. My guess is that's why you see those defense stocks starting to contract now.
The Cold War. Analysts offered a few explanations. A lot of conflict premium was already baked into the valuations. The index had climbed more than 150% between 2020 and 2025, so the stocks were priced for a war before anyone announced one. And modern defense manufacturing runs on very long production cycles. You can't just flip a switch and double your output of Patriot missiles by next quarter. But there's a further reason the European checks aren't all being mailed to the United States. Europe has started to worry about what happens if it becomes dependent on American technology. If Washington now treats its alliances as transactional, then building your entire national defense around high-tech American jets and weapons systems starts to look less like a partnership.
That's the other thing too. The F-35 platform was not only just, it's easy to look at that as just like a military jet, but it's more than that. It's a communications platform. And the countries that were involved in the funding of this project, who bought F-35 jets from us, these jets were all like integrated so that they could speak to each other, so that our allies could speak to each other between F-35 and F-35 across country, right? But that's how much trust we used to have between ourselves and our allies, how much trust they used to have in us. But if they see us behaving the way that we are now, they're going to be very wary about integrating military equipment and hardware into their military forces, because now that's a backdoor for a country that they see as hostile to them.
And more like a subscription that can be cancelled with no notice.
That's another angle I didn't even really consider, right? These modern jets they're digital, right? And if they're relying on us for parts, for, software updates, for maintenance, for the communications platforms, can they, they're looking at that like, we don't even know if this is a good investment, because we don't know if the United States is going to renege on these agreements that they have. And this plane that we bought from them, that they're supposed to support and supposed to be, a mutually beneficial thing for us, to then turn around and either use it against us or pull out the support that's supposed to be there for this equipment that they invested in.
Officials have begun talking openly about American kill switches.
And you can see, the image that he's using here is the F-35. That's probably the big one that is relevant to this conversation.
The possibility that a US administration, perhaps one currently threatening to annex Greenland from a NATO ally, could restrict software updates or spare parts over a foreign policy disagreement and turn your Air Force into a very expensive collection of parked aircraft. There's also a growing suspicion that the doctrine itself is out of date. NATO planning was built around the 1990s Gulf War model, overwhelming, expensive conventional force. In Ukraine.
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier in the video, right? Which is that the Ukrainian war has shown that there's a fundamental shift in the way that modern warfare is waged, with drones being, a lot cheaper to manufacture, a lot easier to deploy, a lot less expensive when one gets destroyed. And so the idea that the Europeans are going to want to buy like jet fighters from us and stuff like that, when they're seeing like, hey, maybe this isn't the most effective military strategy going forward, maybe we're better off kind of investing in drone technology, is probably going to play a role as well.
Russia's $100 million weapon systems are being turned into scrap by disposable drones flown by people holding a tablet in a tree line. Because European militaries lack the capacity to apply overwhelming raw force the way the Pentagon does, their baseline strategy has to look a bit different. As a senior British official put it to the Financial Times, instead of trying to match Russia tank for tank, Europe will have to thwart, create dilemmas, and put up a kind of porcupine defense. The idea isn't to meet Russia head on, it's to make territory so decentralized, prickly, and expensive to invade that nobody bothers trying to swallow it. To get there, Europe wants to copy Ukraine's agile, low-cost manufacturing. Ukraine went from a napkin sketch to combat-tested flamingo.
Something a lot of people don't know is basically, like, I believe that this is the case. I believe, my understanding, is Ukraine basically leads the world now in military drone technology, because they had to. They had to develop this technology. And that's kind of been the case with war going back generations, is that war tends to generate or catalyze. It's a catalyst for the rapid, not only the rapid development, but the rapid deployment and testing of advanced military equipment, which, you can use for civilian equipment too, because some of those technological developments can be translated to things that we use in a civilian capacity. So if we have all this technology with drone warfare now, that technology probably also could be used not necessarily to create drones for civilian use that are killing people, but like the aviation systems, the avionics, the software that used to guide these things. Like you can use that same technology potentially for civilian use without having it be like a militarized drone, right?
Cruise missiles in under 9 months, and now builds them for roughly $500,000 apiece, which is about a fifth the price of an American Tomahawk with double the range. German defense firm Diehl is now in talks to build the thing on German soil rather than wait years for a more expensive American equivalent that Washington hasn't yet agreed to sell. This raises a slightly awkward question that European treasuries are beginning to ask out loud. Ukraine, and in its own way Iran, have both shown that large numbers of cheap, expendable systems can blunt, bankrupt, or humiliate a far richer and more sophisticated military. A $100,000 drone that destroys a $50 million jet on the ground is not a fair fight, and it isn't meant to be. So does Europe actually need fleets of expensive American fighter jets, or is a good part of that spending less about deterrence than about sending a tribute to Washington to keep the security relationship sweet? Nobody phrases it quite that way at a NATO summit, but the arithmetic is doing the talking. Russia's nuclear arsenal, for its part, has been useless against every single thing that's actually going wrong for it. You can't nuke a drone shortage. There's a second, quieter point buried underneath all the alarm about the Russian threat. Russia spends enormous sums on its military, and it still couldn't take Ukraine. Europe collectively already outspends Russia on defense.
Look how much the United States spends, right? What if the United States, with all the spending that we do, the technology that we're investing in, everything, gets outcompeted by a fraction of the budget in terms of, drone technology.
And it's wealthier, more populous, and further up the technology ladder. The country that was supposed to be capable of reaching the English Channel in a matter of weeks has spent 4 years failing to capture towns a 2-hour drive from its own border, advancing by one CSIS measure at about 70 meters a day, which is slower than the Somme. The case for European rearmament is real, but the case for outright panic assumes a 10-foot-tall Russia that the last 4 years have not exactly delivered. The irony here is hard to miss. The US defense establishment spent decades lecturing Europe about spending more on its own military. Europe has finally started and is deliberately designing a force that runs without American weapons, built in factories that aren't in America. There's a persistent optimism among certain foreign policy commentators that this whole thing can be wrapped up with one neat executive deal. The logic usually rests on a psychological framework known as the cornered Putin theory. Diplomats who like this theory lean on that rat, the one from Putin's hallway, the one we filed away earlier. The lesson, we're told, is that you must never corner Russia, or the cornered rat, a nuclear superpower, might do something drastic. There's just one problem with using the story as a diplomatic roadmap. The people citing it seem to have forgotten how it ends. In the story, the rat didn't negotiate and Putin didn't win. The rat attacked and Putin ran away. And Putin, of all people, should have remembered that. By launching a full-scale invasion, he did the cornering. He backed Ukraine into a corner and waited for it to fold. Instead, it turned around and lunged. And 4 years later, it's Putin backed against the wall, running a war of attrition that's steadily dismantling his own economy, with no way out he'd care to explain on television. Once you work out who's actually cornered, Ukraine's reluctance to sign a peace deal makes more sense. It's not that Ukrainians are uninterested in peace, it's that they've learned deals with Moscow tend not to survive contact with the next Russian offensive. In 1994, Ukraine signed the Budapest Memorandum, handing over the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world in exchange for explicit security guarantees from the United States, the UK, and Russia. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea and started a war in the Donbass. There was a ceasefire, an 8-year pause to rearm, and then the rest of the invasion came in 2022.
Yeah, so I mean, it goes without saying, but he's saying that the Ukrainians are backed into a corner. They're not willing to surrender because they don't trust that the Russians will honor any of those terms. Because in the past, they've had similar situations where the Russians invaded. They had a ceasefire that they agreed on, and then the Russians just used those next couple of years to rearm themselves and then get right back into trying to invade them again. Whereas right now, imagine where they're at right now. The Russians are not doing very good. They're in a big bind, economically, militarily, geopolitically. The Russians are probably incentivized to try to reach some kind of ceasefire so they could do the same thing again. Okay, we're getting our shit pushed in right now. We need to take a pause, regroup, regather ourselves, and then in a couple of years, we're going to try to do it again. Whereas if the Ukrainians wait it out a little bit, they keep the pressure on, they force the Russians to, I don't know, either collapse or force them to have to make like a more substantive deal at the end state of this conflict.
Two, from Kiev's perspective, a settlement with Moscow isn't a peace treaty, it's a half-time. This has left Europe in an unusual position. As The Economist recently put it, NATO is simultaneously in the best and worst shape of its life, expanding, rearming, and better funded than ever, and at the same time...
That is the crazy thing, is that NATO could legitimately be in the most strongest position it could possibly be in decades, because Russia's being destroyed without NATO even having to be directly involved. It's being destroyed at a fraction of the military price. Like the amount that we have funded Ukraine, not only in the United States, but also from Europe, is a drop in the bucket compared to the amount of money that we typically spend on defense spending. And for that, we're seeing the erosion of the Russian military. If the United States and the European allies that form NATO were more united than they are right now, this would be an incredibly opportune time for the West to solidify its geopolitical hegemony. But instead, right, during this incredibly opportune time, instead, the United States is splintering the alliance that NATO has. NATO is basically experiencing internal fighting itself, so it can't really fully take advantage of the opportunity that's before it.
I'm hollowed out by the prospect of America walking away. In that environment, European planners are working out that they may need Ukraine roughly as much as Ukraine needs them. If the plan is a decentralized porcupine defense to deter Russia, letting Ukraine fall would mean surrendering the most combat-tested part of the whole perimeter, which leaves the much-anticipated peace summit fairly dead in the water. Even if Putin wanted a diplomatic exit tomorrow, Europe has almost nothing to put on the table. It can't.
It's so sad, too, to think that the Ukrainians are fighting for their life to experience freedom, Western liberal civilization, while simultaneously the countries that it's looked up to for such a long time that civilians want to model themselves off of are sliding in the opposite direction towards anti-liberal, illiberal authoritarianism. What a disappointing, sad state of affairs.
Hand over Ukrainian territory, and The Economist notes that the strongest inducement it can realistically offer is the promise of somewhat lighter sanctions later on. That is not a triumph you bring home to a domestic audience after 4 years, several 100,000 casualties, and an emptied national wealth fund. The Russian billionaire Andrei Melenchenko, currently 8th on Russia's Forbes list, recently laid out the actual options in an essay for The Economist, and a triumphant return to superpower status wasn't among them. He sketched 5 scenarios, most of them bleak. State collapsed, a besieged North Korea-style fortress economy, a slide back to the periphery of the West as a poor relation, or absorption into China's orbit as a supplier of raw materials and a strategic buffer.
Basically almost like a vassal state for China. Like, basically just China's bitch, pretty much.
The man is not a dissident.
My guess is that's the direction that it'll go, because I don't think the Russian population or Putin can stomach the idea of trying to get on their knees and try to make peace with the West after everything that they've, everything that they've done. So, meanwhile, they've relied on a relationship with China for the past couple of decades, so they're probably going to double down on that relationship, and not necessarily intentionally, but just by the inertia of what's going on, will probably over time be kind of dependent upon China.
The ammonia from his plans goes into munitions, which makes it all the more striking that the best case he can muster is predictable. And the striking thing is how far up and down the country that verdict travels. It's exactly what the economists at the Kiel Institute meant by structural exhaustion. A tour guide in Fedosa, asked by the economist what she wanted, put it slightly differently. No grand ambitions, no one trying to make things better, just the sun coming up in the morning and the tourists coming back in summer. The spreadsheet and the beach have reached the same conclusion. Vladimir Putin launched this war ostensibly to push back NATO and secure Russia's place as a fiercely independent great power. 4 years on, Europe is running its largest military buildup since the Cold War, and the Russian economy has been reduced to...
That's another thing to consider too, is that if you think about this in the context of NATO versus Russia, while Russia is economically deteriorating, militarily deteriorating, the European countries are building up their military capability now. And like they were already in a pretty decent position before all of this started. So now the disparity is going to grow like even larger than it was before.
To a discount fuel supplier to Beijing. You can keep a wartime economy looking healthy for a surprisingly long time by cannibalizing the civilian sector to make tanks and shells, but when the rainy day funds hit zero and your last remaining major customer is bleeding your margins, you're not an independent empire, you're a subsidiary. If you found this interesting, you should watch...
That's what I was saying, about them basically being the bitch to China.
Next. Don't forget to check out our sponsor, Ground News, using the link in the video description.
All right, well, yeah, I like this video. Subscribe to this guy if you aren't already. I think he makes pretty decent videos from what I've seen so far. All right, I'm going to take a quick restroom break, quick potty break, and then we'll get back. We'll watch this video on America 250. All right, hold on.
Take it away. Enjoy, everybody. I know I'm good.
All right.
America, it's been 250 years, and President Trump has a big gift for you. It's a giant arch with what is very definitely not a Nazi Iron Eagle on it. It's a refurbished reflecting pool that immediately filled up with algae thanks to saboteurs who hate America. He gave us a UFC fight on the White House lawn that just so happened to coincide with his own 80th birthday. He slapped his...
Talking about this before, but it's actually remarkable to me that just stepping back, pretending that Trump was never involved in this whole thing, right? If we were just to pretend that was the case, that UFC thing, like, it actually doesn't look bad. But it's so interesting to me because a lot of people like UFC and everything. I didn't hear anybody really talk about that event. And I wonder if it's just because it was so tainted by the partisan politics surrounding it that it was too distasteful for anyone to really want to care about. It's just so wild to me because I just imagine that's the kind of event that would have drawn a lot of attention. But I don't know. I don't know about you. I didn't hear really anybody talk about it. Even people that I typically know are really into UFC.
Name on the Kennedy Center, although me and Judge made him take it back. He filled the skies of D.C. with hours and hours of overflights, followed by a gonzo display of fireworks that filled the air with...
By the way, that firework display, what a disaster. I mean, frankly speaking, we kind of had the same thing in the Bay Area. We had fireworks off of the Golden Gate Bridge, which I guess hasn't been the case in a really long time. I wanted to check it out and take photos and everything, but the fog rolled in. It's one of the persistent aspects of living in the Bay. And you know, as Outcast once said, you can plan a pretty picnic, but you can't predict the weather. You can plan all this stuff, but sometimes the weather's going to come along and kind of you know, ruin it, I suppose. But America 250, they had the same issue. But the thing is, like, they had like the most fireworks that have ever been let off at a single point in time in history, my understanding. And there was so much, it was so overcast that you couldn't really see it. I mean, this doesn't look too bad. I wonder if this is legit or not. It's so sad to even ask that question because, you know, the White House lies so much, you have to kind of wonder. But it kind of looked the same in the Bay Area where you'd have the fireworks go up, but they would explode within the fog and you couldn't really make out what was going on. It's kind of sad. In this case, I can't imagine the amount of money that they spent on this. I mean, ideally it would have been cool, you know, if there wasn't so much fog, you could see all the fireworks further back, but it seems like with the fog that was had, yeah, say this is a good example, like you can only really see kind of the layer of fireworks that are in front, and then all the fireworks behind kind of get lost in the fog, unfortunately.
50,000
yeah, see, look.
packed into 40 minutes. But as spectacular as the show was, getting there and getting home, able to evacuate
chaos, but we did find our way.
Anyways.
Acrid smoke for 24 hours, and he gave us the Great American State Fair on the National Mall, which is just like every state
That was
fair
so
you went to
incredibly
in your own
pathetic.
hometown, minus all the rides and games and crazy fried food and people. But that just made it easier for the true patriot.
It could have been really cool. Could have been really awesome. And that's the thing that she's going to go over, which is that Congress had been planning this for a while, or they supplied the funding to plan this for a while. And it's supposed to be more of a bipartisan thing, but it got taken over by the Trump administration and turned into a partisan thing. And it just looks like an incredible shell of what it really would have been. I mean, they had like a lot of popular generational American artists that were going to play there, and a lot of them pulled. I mean, she'll go over it. Let me.
Who showed up
Getting ahead of myself.
Right up close and enjoy all the AI-generated attractions. Okay, to be fair, it does have one Ferris wheel, which was even working most of the time, and it was pretty packed on July 4th itself. Luckily, DC was a balmy 102 degrees for the first week of festivities, and then it rained. But you know what?
Not only hot, but also balmy, because it looked like the weather was, you know, overcast with rain and stuff like that.
They say it's not the heat, it's the...
It's funny because on the right they'll talk about like, oh, it's a this and that is a sign from God, but when something bad happens, they don't consider that a sign from God. Like maybe the weather kind of raining on the parade, in a very literal sense. I guess there's not literally a parade, but the weather raining on their parade, maybe that's a sign from God that this whole administration is an affront to
humidity that
to God.
Makes an outdoor event amazing. But this is a law channel, so we're not here to just crack jokes about the latest administration debacle, although we're definitely not above it. For the last year...
The reason I wanted to watch this video too is I watched this earlier, but what she goes over, I mean, I know it was bad, but I was surprised about how bad and how corrupt it actually was, and how much information we have on how corrupt it was.
Trump's allies inside and outside of government.
And I haven't heard anybody talk about it. This should be, in an ordinary time, this would have been the scandal of the entire administration, that so much of this was corrupted and wasted and, you know, so on and so forth. We're going to see right now.
Have been quietly building this grifting machine to turn a birthday party for America into a celebration of the president himself. It involved a shadow company buried inside a national park charity, selling private access to the president for millions of dollars, lying to...
This is the kind of stuff that when Democrats do get into power, they're going to have investigations into this, and the people involved, like, just insane these people are going to have to, like, we're going to have some real incredible serious consequences for this stuff.
Donors about where their money was going, allegedly, and paying Trump's own political operatives to run the whole thing. They tried to take over America's official 250th birthday commission first, and when that didn't work, they looted it and built their own. They called it Freedom 250, and it may be the most expensive vanity project and potential federal crime in American history. In normal times, America's 250th birthday would be a nonpartisan event that people of all
Yeah, that's the thing. See, it's not just that it was a flop. What she describes in this video is like legitimately one of the biggest crimes in United States history. And nobody's talking about it.
Political orientations could enjoy together, and that was originally the plan. In 2016, Congress passed the United States Semi-Quincentennial Commission Act, establishing an
10 years ago
America 250 to plan festivities for July 4th, 2026. The law passed by unanimous consent in the Senate and was widely supported by both parties. But Trump always planned to hijack this project. In May of 2023, candidate Trump released a campaign video pledging to convene his own task force called Salute to America 250 to run a full year of birthday events culminating in a giant festival at the Iowa State Fairgrounds. Never mind that the actual congressionally chartered commission had already been planning for 7 years. Just a week into his second term, Trump signed an executive order establishing Task Force 250 inside the Department of Defense with himself as a chair and Vice President Vance as...
How weird is that, by the way, to establish that in the Department of, what did she say? Department of Defense or Department of Justice? The chair shall, executive director, who shall administer day-to-day operations, shall be a report to assistant of president, domestic policy, the chair, vice president. Whoever has deciding the chair shall convene regular meetings, determine its agenda, consistent. President, domestic policy, chair may designate members of task force, blah, 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 blah. Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury. What did she say? Hold on.
Vice chair, establishing Task Force 250 inside the Department of Defense with himself as a chair.
Department of Defense. What the fuck does the Department of Defense? We're talking about the military. Does the Department of Defense have anything to do with something like this? This is like a celebration, a domestic civilian celebration of the United States anniversary. What does it have to do with the Department of Defense? That should be like your first red flag. Like, what is going on here? This is not right.
President Vance as vice chair. Then he set about planning 2 very elaborate birthday parties, not for the country, but for himself. On June 14, 2025, which happened to be Trump's 79th birthday, he was treated to a giant military parade to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army. Then,
you know, by the way, that's like textbook dictatorship stuff. Dictators will have military parades on their birthday as like a dedication of the military to themselves.
1 year later, he had a UFC fight staged on the South Lawn of the White House for his 80th birthday. But Trump was not content with throwing himself giant parties. He wants to leave his mark permanently on the city with a 250-foot arch near Arlington National Cemetery that will loom over the Lincoln Memorial, a White House ballroom where the East Wing once stood. He's painting the reflecting pool American flag blue, and he's going to...
How disgusting, by the way, like a president making a monument to themselves, right? Keep in mind, like the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Monument, all these different monuments we have in D.C., these were always made like retrospectively when the country, in like a bipartisan fashion, had determined like in retrospect, we all basically acknowledge that this is a great president or a great political figure or whatever. He's making it for himself. He's basically like giving himself a trophy, and he's trying to make it bigger than, you know, Lincoln's memorial. You know, Lincoln, who fought the Civil War to keep the United States, you know, together as a union, and he's trying to crown himself bigger, better, more superior to that.
Turn the East Potomac Public Golf Course into a Trump-style private one, all of which is supposed to be a gift for the nation's 250th anniversary.
He goes, Jesse, you want to see the rendition of the big, beautiful ballroom? I said, sure, let me see it. He said, Jesse, it's a monument.
TPUSA's America Fest. Was this at America 250? Because think about that too. TPUSA is a partisan political organization that works for the Republican Party. And so now we're using U.S. taxpayer money, regardless of your political affiliation, to fund a political speech for a partisan organization.
I'm building a monument to myself because no one else will.
No, come on. Does that sound like the modest, self-effacing guy who's planning to plant 47 mature maple trees in Lafayette Square to mark the glorious occasion of his own presidency? Would the man who slapped his name on the side of the Kennedy Center build monuments to himself on the public dime? The problem, though, is that when you turn a birthday party for America into a birthday party for one guy, a guy who's pretty unpopular, not so many people show up.
Man, we've got thousands of people celebrating this birthday with us, Salmi.
And so the Great American State Fair on the National Mall was
Said
substantially
that with a
less
straight
than it was
face.
cracked up to be. Here's White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt talking about how cool it is to be alive during this historic time while accidentally documenting the fact that no one...
You have to wonder sometimes, like, are these people, like, do they genuinely believe that? Are they actually that delusional? Like, do they actually look at what's going on around them and like, oh, this is amazing, this is great? Or do they just project that image because they know they have to sell it as a propaganda piece?
else was there. According to CNN, Trump's pissed that no one came to celebrate him, and White House officials who tweeted aerial photos showing acres of empty fields during his kickoff speech scrambled to delete their post. And so Trump did what he always does, which is insist on social media that the mall is packed with happy people and everybody loving it. With the obligatory swipe at Biden and Obama, of course. All of that is intensely embarrassing, but what happened behind the scenes was worse. We're living through a weird moment, and things feel shaky for all of us, especially students. So if your private student loans are in default or you're struggling with payments, the sponsor of this portion of the video, Why Refi, is a bipartisan, congressionally chartered commission dedicated to your loan repayment and give you the invaluable peace of mind of fixed, low monthly payments. So click or scan to talk to Why Refi today, or we will see you in court. Now remember, there was already a bipartisan, congressionally chartered commission dedicated to planning the semi-quincentennial. It had been working for 8 years when Trump came back to the White House and set up Task Force 250. And at first, the two teams worked together. American 250 chair Rosie Rios, a former Treasury official under Obama, understood that she was going to have to suck up to Trump to protect the project, and she did. After the 2024 election, she sent him a memo suggesting that he invite King Charles III to visit, echoing Queen Elizabeth's trip for the bicentennial in 1976. And Rios added a whole bunch of Trumpland heavy hitters to the America 250 team. Michael Shearer at The Atlantic reports that Rios brought in Chris LaCivita, Trump's former campaign manager, and Justin Paparale, whose company Event Strategies Inc., or ESI, has planned a bunch of Trump events, including the March on D.C. on January 6, 2021. Meredith O'Rourke, a Trump campaign fundraiser, was hired to solicit donations for the project. Trump appointed Monica Crowley, the U.S. Chief of Protocol, to serve concurrently as America 250's principal media representative. And the White House installed its own executive director over the commission, Ariel Abergel, a 25-year-old former Fox News producer. Rios bent over...
It was like all the people who were who they no, for place is the right word, but they inserted all of these people into the organization for what was originally a bipartisan thing. All of them are partisan actors. They are contributors to his campaign. They're Fox News hosts. They're, you know, his personal advisors, so on and so forth. At that point, it's not really a organization for America. It's not really an organization for the unity and the celebration of the country as a whole, but it's more so, it's just they hijacked this bipartisan celebration to turn it into a political propaganda piece for the Republican Party.
Backwards to stay in the president's good graces. When Trump wanted to stage that military parade for his own birthday, America 250 let him raise money for it through the commission's own nonprofit. More than $30 million.
Crazy part is I didn't know anything about that. That's wild to me. To be like, okay, something that's totally unrelated to what this funding was supposed to originally go for, and they decided to just like, well, in this case, they're not really diverting funds, but they're still using that organization, that branding, to funnel money to their, you know, some other project that it wasn't intended for.
Got routed through America 250 for the parade and Trump's Iowa speech and his West Point commencement address and a Fort Bragg speech, all of which were sponsored by companies like Palantir, Amazon, Oracle, and Coinbase, which have business or regulatory issues before.
Just to be clear, by the way, Palantir, the name Palantir, or that company, I think that's Peter Thiel's company, like a surveillance company. A Palantir, a data accumulation company, that's my understanding. Palantir comes from Lord of the Rings, and it's like a crystal ball that lets you see things that are going on elsewhere, right? But the thing about the Palantir is it was created by Sauron, by the Dark Lord, by the evil, you know, tyrannical figure. And it's designed to, it's like a two-way street. If you're looking into the Palantir, Sauron can look through the Palantir and see you. And so for a company to name itself that, it's like they're telling on themselves. They're basically saying that they're evil people that want to accumulate information on everybody. And it's so crazy that they're just basically putting that out there in front of everybody, and we all just pretend that that's normal. It'd be like naming your company the Satan Evil I want to kill everybody company, and then everybody just playing along like that isn't like absurd and a indication of your motives and intentions.
Or the Trump administration. But the relationship between the White House and America 250 curdled fast, according to a newly released report by Democrats on the House Committee on National Resources. TLDR, Trump wanted to use America 250 for increasingly partisan purposes, and when he got pushback, his allies, including La Savita, O'Rourke, and Caporale, jumped ship and took all the money with them. Here's Trump telling a crowd at the Iowa State Fairgrounds during a speech that was paid for through America 250 that the Great America State Fair would actually take place on the National Mall.
But the Great American State Fair will bring America 250 programming to fairgrounds across the country, culminating in a giant patriotic festival next summer on the National Mall, featuring exhibits from all 50 states, and all 50 states are excited, and I was excited.
That move displaced the Smithsonian Folklife Festival, which has been held on the mall every summer since 1967 to honor contemporary living cultural traditions and celebrate those who practice and sustain them. Now,
and you know what? The Trump administration has said, they put up like memos or whatever saying the Smithsonian, I think it was Smithsonian, right? That they're woke. So you can kind of see the motive going on here. They want to replace museums, artists, celebrations that are bipartisan, that are things that they don't like, that narratives that they don't like, things that they want to gloss over, and replacing it with like their own partisan, censorious, curated vision of America that they want to push, ram down everybody's throat.
Sustaining those traditions on the road, i.e. not in the nation's capital. But okay, if that was all Trump had said, it would have been fine. But the rest of the speech was incredibly partisan, and as the crowd waved America 250 signs, Trump urged Republicans to get out in the midterms, saying he hated Democrats because they hate America.
Not one Democrat voted for us, and they wouldn't vote only because they hate Trump.
So again, they're using taxpayer funding that's coming from Republicans, Democrats, independent voters. All of us have to pay the taxes, and they're using that funding to politicize against those very voters who have to fund those things.
But I hate them too, you know that? So it's
like we are paying for them to talk shit about us. That's crazy.
So do me. I really do. I hate them. I cannot stand them because I really believe they hate our country. You want to know the truth?
Shearer reports that Abergel pushed the commission to focus on televised events glorifying the president rather than programming by and for regular Americans. And in September, he used America...
Pushed it internally for America 250 to focus more on televised events, not the less visible programming at the core of the effort. In September, he used group's official Instagram account to post, "God bless Charlie Kirk," after the conservative activist assassination. Like, why? You know, if you want to say something about Charlie Kirk or whatever, put it on the White House account. Why specifically the America 250 account? Because you're trying to merge what was supposed to be a bipartisan effort with your partisan political efforts. Charlie Kirk, at the end of the day, however you want to, however you want to sell it one way or the other, at the end of the day, Charlie Kirk was the head of a political organization. Turning Points USA was like explicitly an organization designed to get young college students into conservative politics. That was their goal. They weren't even shy about that. I'm not making anything up. Like, they would have told you that themselves.
250's official Instagram account to post, "God bless Charlie Kirk," after Kirk's assassination. That was the end of Abergel at America 250, but it was not the end of the takeover attempt, just the end of trying to do it from inside the building. Now, this next part requires you to understand the way that the federal government solicits charitable donations, because if you, as an individual, or more likely a corporation, want to subsidize a project for the benefit of the American people, you can't just write a check to the Treasury and put in the memo line, "For my special project." Congress has to stand up a nonprofit that can accept public funds that are then administered by an executive branch agency, and we've seen the Trump administration use that model to fund projects that can't get through Congress. Most famously, of course, is the White House ballroom. Trump knocked down the East Wing, and then he said he was building this giant party barn in its place with privately donated funds, or not actually. Now, the donor list for the ballroom includes a lot of big companies that also want things from the federal government, and the construction without congressional approval was later ruled illegal by 2 courts. But okay, that is the model, to solicit the money and get around Congress. And at first, the administration planned to use America 250's nonprofit to accept donations to support all of Trump's parties for himself. That's how they funded the America 250 parade on his birthday. And according to House Democrats, White House officials pressed the commission to fold Trump-aligned programming into its slate of events, including the National Day of Prayer, UFC fight, and Patriot Games.
That's crazy to me that like they're using U.S. taxpayer funding to support things like National Day of Prayer. The First Amendment says Congress shall not establish a religion. It can't infringe on a religion. If you want to run like a National Day of Prayer that's, private, separate from the government, that's one thing. But they're using taxpayer money. If you are of a different denomination, if you're an atheist, why should you be funding religious organizations and events with your taxpayer money?
Pressuring it to transform America 250's nonpartisan events into Trump rallies. But some of America 250's activities were going to be subsidized by Congress. And so in May of 2025, La Savita, Trump's former campaign director, urged the organization to ask Congress for $150 million, with the understanding that $100 million of that would fund America 250's actual programming and $50 million would go to the White House's own events through Task Force 250. O'Rourke would raise another $85 million for the White House's priorities, and they got it. Congress gave them the whole $150 million allocation and put the Interior Department in charge of handing out the money. But then the White House started turning those events into MAGA rallies, which A, ate up much more than $150 million, and B, pissed off the bipartisan board of America 250, who was never going to go along with that. And remember, that $150 million is controlled by Secretary Doug Burgum at the Department of the Interior. He can turn off the money spigot at will, and that is what he did. In October of 2025, Trump's advisor stood up Freedom 250, a Delaware LLC whose registered agent, Harvard Business Services, is a go-to vendor for anonymous Trump-affiliated organizations. Freedom 250 was not associated with America 250's congressionally chartered nonprofit. Instead, it operated through the National Park Foundation, the congressionally chartered philanthropic partner of the National Park Service, which is, of course, administered by the Interior Department and Secretary Doug Burgum. Freedom 250 effectively took over all planning for events in D.C., while America 250 was told to focus.
Don't be confused, by the way. This is intentional. The Trump administration created this different task force with the name that is incredibly similar to make it confusing, to hide what they were doing from the American people, from the taxpayer, to make it seem like it was official what they were doing. But what they were actually doing was they were diverting the funds from this congressionally allocated bipartisan budget to then go to this separate task force with a similar name that's supposed to be confusing in order to then use that money for partisan, Republican, MAGA, Trump-affiliated events and organizations.
Focus elsewhere in the country. Freedom 250 started hoovering up an increasing share of federal funding, scooping up donations, and absorbing long-planned events, often with Trump placed at the center of them. Congress's own memorandum of agreement had promised America 250 $50 million by February 1st, but only $25 million ever showed up. Meanwhile, between December and April, Interior transferred $68 million to the National Park Foundation for Freedom 250. But here's the thing about routing this stuff through a charity. They don't have to disclose their donors. So by parking Freedom 250 inside the National Park Foundation, they got to wrap themselves in the patriotic mantle of America's national parks and exempt themselves from the transparency Congress built into the actual 250th Commission, all while seizing funds allocated by Congress for America 250 and taking control of the programming. Now, I have a lot more I want to say about this, but let's just say my thoughts are not always advertiser friendly. But luckily, I have an outlet where I can speak freely without getting demonetized and even use some R-rated naughty words whenever I want. You can watch this exclusive content on Nebula, which sponsored this portion of the video. Nebula is a streaming service where you can watch tons of exclusive content from us and hundreds of your favorite creators ad-free and early. In fact, every video we make contains additional legal analysis and uncensored editorial that you can only watch on Nebula. We put a lot of thought into that exclusive content, so it's always nice to see it shouted out in the comments here on YouTube. And if you use our link or code, you can get 50% off our annual subscription. So that's a year's worth of the best content for only $30, or you can get 40% off a lifetime of Nebula. Pay once for $300 and never pay again. It really is the best deal of all. Either way, click or scan now to continue watching Legal Eagle on Nebula, or we will see you in court. The timing here is not subtle. On November 11, 2025, a week before Freedom 250 had even formally begun operating, the National Park Service signed a cooperative agreement with the foundation designating Freedom 250 as the primary public-private partner for the entire 250th commemoration.
Public-private partner. So now we're merging private organizations with public, with public, like, I'm going to use not the word funding necessarily, but public activity. And so now we're going to obfuscate, right? What is official public funding and activity with what is private, partisan, not bipartisan, not, official activity, right? To me, that's obvious that that's where we're going with this story. So let's continue the video, because I could already probably tell it's probably the direction that we're going, which is now we're getting into roundabout, schemy ways of funneling public taxpayer money towards partisan private interests that aren't, now the funding's not being used for what it was intended for.
With direct liaison rights to NPS program officials. In April, America 250 surrendered its own trademark to the Betsy Ross flag to Freedom 250. You may recognize the distinctive flag with 13 stars arranged in a circle. Freedom 250 has adopted those stars for its own logo. Here's Congressman Jared Huffman summarizing the committee members' findings.
They call it Freedom 250. On paper, it's a shell company registered in Delaware through the same anonymous vendor the president uses for his other businesses. But this LLC is different. It was lodged inside a National Park Foundation, a charity that's funded our national parks for 50 years. Think about why you'd do that. As part of a charity, the LLC could take in huge sums of money without ever naming who or where it came from. This arrangement lets them sell access to the president, collect checks from anyone willing to pay, and keep every donor's name secret, all under the banner of a trusted American institution, the National Parks Foundation. Then they starved America 250. Congress had set aside $150 million to celebrate our 250th. The America 250 Commission was promised $100 million of that funding. But in November of 2025, the White House told the America 250 chairwoman she would only get $50 million. And in the months that followed, they whittled it down to just $25 million. The rest of the money was taken by Freedom 250. Between this and other redirected funds, hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars are now unaccounted for.
Meanwhile, Trump's personal business has been separately pursuing a trademark on...
It's crazy to me that you can have like this blatant corruption happening in front of everybody, and Republicans will find like the most minuscule random shit that they can't even prove, and will talk about it nonstop, endlessly. They're just doing this right in front of everybody's face. Nobody talks about it. Nobody cares.
Trump 250 with a logo that looks strikingly similar to America 250's own. Do you need a Trump 250 wine glass to hold your Trump wine? Well, lucky for you, it's only $18.75. Drink up, America.
So they're selling merchandise for Trump, not for America, not bipartisan, for Trump, and they're mingling it with this fund that was supposed to be set up by Congress for the American people, for the United States to be bipartisan.
And that is...
I mean, what do you call this other than like blatant corruption? Like, this is the most obvious example of it.
not the only part of this plan that has directly enriched the president himself. Remember that UFC fight on the White House lawn for Trump's 80th birthday? Fighter bonuses were reportedly paid out in USD1, the Trump family.
Okay, so now they have a UFC event that they put on with, you know, the White House. So this is like mingling official government business with this UFC event. But the bonuses for those fights were in the form of cryptocurrency that the Trump family and their business partners have control over. This is a cryptocurrency that they created, that they have financial stake in.
Family's own dollar peg stablecoin issued by World Liberty Financial, a crypto venture that sits in a trust run by the president.
And if you haven't heard the name of this World Liberty Financial thing, this is very important for you to know, because they've been running a bunch of crypto schemes on behalf of the Trump family this entire time. And they've been mingling it with official government activity.
Served as the bonus pool's presenting partner. Ringside seats sold for up to $1.5 million a piece, which easily offset the $60 million UFC paid to sponsor the event, even if you set aside the fact that the event was essentially a 6-hour ad for the UFC set at the White House. And weeks after the fight was announced, Trump himself bought stock between $15,000 and $150,000 of it in UFC's parent company. And once Freedom 250 became untethered from America 250...
Talk about insider trading. Everybody always talks about Pelosi. I mean, this is bigger than any of that. by a wide
They
margin.
were free to inject that kind of pay-to-play access peddling into all the semi-quincentennial celebrations. Organizers circulated a bespoke sponsorship brochure with packages starting at $500,000 and climbing past $10 million. In exchange, donors got tiered perks escalating from VIP access to speaking roles at the 4th of July celebration to private receptions and a historic photo opportunity with the president himself. 7 of those sponsors hired the same lobbying firm to represent them, Ballard Partners, the country's highest-earning lobbying shop, founded by a longtime Trump supporter, Brian Ballard. The firm's alumni include Chief of Staff Susie Wiles and former AG Pam Bondi. And actually, funny enough, Trump put all 3 of those, Ballard, Wiles, and Bondi, on the board of the Kennedy Center, where they then voted to rename the place after Trump, which is funny, but I mean, it's not funny, haha. Sponsors include Chevron, ExxonMobil, John Deere, Lockheed Martin, Oracle, Palantir, and Scott's Miracle-Gro, all of which...
These companies should never be able to live this down, like, ever again. Or at the very least, whoever's in charge of them now, whoever comes in the next administration, I don't know what specific like anti-corruption laws are applicable here, but there's got to be something. This kind of stuff, like, people need to face genuine, serious, incredible consequences for this kind of behavior. Whoever's in charge of whoever was in charge of this and facilitated this within these companies, like they shouldn't be able to run these companies anymore, or these companies are going to have to face some consequences themselves. It's either going to be whoever within those companies was involved in this are going to have to take the blow, or the company itself is going to have to take the blow. They're involved in blatant, like, I don't know if there's ever been corruption in our country that even amounts to this before, like in the entire history of the United States. This is crazy.
Want something from the president in his official capacity. Larry Ellison of Oracle got the green light for his merger of Paramount with Skydance last year, and now he's trying to take over Warner Brothers, which owns CNN. John Deere was less lucky. It's been desperately fighting advocates of the right to repair its farm equipment, but Trump refused to budge on that one. In June, he signed an executive order reaffirming his administration's commitment not to prosecute farmers, although he called it freedom to fix, because I guess that sounds less communist or something. John Deere can join the Maha movement in a bowl of sour grapes. For years, Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert Kennedy railed against the dangers of the pesticide glyphosate, better known as Roundup, which is...
That tells you everything you need to know about Kennedy, by the way. It tells you how much of a sellout he is. He spent his entire life, the last couple years trying to sell himself on all this, all this chemical stuff that he would talk about. And then as soon as he's in the Trump administration, not a word. He just allows it to happen. He's not saying anything. He's participating in it.
Sold by Scott's Miracle-Gro. In February, Trump put out another executive order declaring that glyphosate production is critical to the nation's food supply and ordering the Secretary of Agriculture to ensure an adequate pipeline of phosphorus for its production. The Trump administration also sided with Monsanto.
Oh. Hold on. I need to go back. I need to hear that again.
Food supply and ordering the Secretary of Agriculture to ensure an adequate pipeline of phosphorus for its production. The Trump
So now you're directing government resources, government officials, people in charge of these agencies to set aside natural resources of the country to benefit this specific company. It's crazy that like Republicans will talk about communism. Like how is this not the state interfering in the economy and picking winners and losers and, you know, giving sweetheart deals and giving preferential treatment to corporations that it's in bed with.
Trump administration also sided with Monsanto, Scott's production partner for Roundup, at the Supreme Court, alleging that the product causes cancer. Monsanto won that case, by the way, and Scott's won too, thanks to a big boost from Trump. By sheer coincidence, Scott sponsored not only the Great American...
A lot of people don't understand this. The Supreme Court isn't necessarily beholden to Donald Trump. The Supreme Court, as it currently exists today, was bought and paid for and put in place by the corporatocracy in the United States. That's who they work for. If you look at the consistency of their rulings, or rather, maybe I should say, if you look at the seeming inconsistency of their rulings, the through line that you do see in there is that they preference corrupt corporatocracy business interests.
American State Fair through Freedom 250, but also Trump's UFC fight pledging $1 million to restore the lawn to its original state through a combination of monetary and product support by resodding and reseeding the South Lawn after it was destroyed for Trump's birthday brawl. As the House Democrats put it, the equation...
Look at that, self-dealing, right? Put on an event, have a lot of people on the lawn, destroying the lawn. Then your business partners that you're already giving all these other like preferential treatment to, you're going to hire them to now replace that lawn.
is simple. The president gets money for vanity projects. The companies get a private channel to seek favor, while contracts, grants, enforcement actions, or other federal matters are pending, and taxpayers are left with a government that operates less like a public trust and more like a pay-to-play scheme. After Freedom 250 was set up, Trump's people immediately transferred their efforts to the programs that he and his allies controlled. Meredith O'Rourke, Trump's former chief fundraiser, became the engine of Freedom 250 solicitations, including the sponsorship tiers that put that literal price tag on access to the president. Justin Caporale, Trump's former executive producer for events, ran the operation through Event Strategies, the same outfit that staged the rallies around January 6th. And Brad Parscale, Trump's longtime digital strategist, got handed the event registration platform, meaning every person who signs up for a nonpartisan 250 event has their data fed straight into Parscale's voter targeting operation for Trump's campaign and party. LaCivita told The Atlantic that the move...
So now they're using official government resources to try to run get out the vote campaigns for the Republican Party. So if you're a Democrat, if you're an independent, you're paying for the Republican Party to you're paying it to campaign for itself.
Wasn't to wrest control of the events and turn them into celebrations of the president himself. It was that America 250 can't get over the fact that Trump won. They want to apologize for America's 250th. We don't. House Democrats tell a different story.
According to a whistleblower, not everyone who donated money to Freedom 250 knew that's what they were doing. Fundraisers misled donors who intended to support the America 250 Commission by giving them Freedom 250's banking information.
Yeah, see, that's the point of having the naming being so similar, is that people who aren't necessarily corrupt, who were just trying to donate to this effort to celebrate the America's 250th anniversary, they're not realizing that their money is going into something that it was completely not intended for. Because the names sound familiar, and it's within the umbrella of what the government's doing, right? It's in another agency. It's taken over by Trump's cronies that he put in these positions of power in the government, but it's not the same thing, right? But the people that are donating to it, they don't know that.
Meant for the nonpartisan birthday foundation were routed to Trump's shadow corporation instead. This is potential wire fraud.
If donors were actually deceived into sending money to Freedom 250 when they intended to give it to America 250, that might well be wire fraud. And if Democrats take back the House in November and get subpoena power, you can bet they're going to be all over that one. In their report, they say that after Freedom 250's launch, donors who had intended to support America 250 came under pressure to redirect their giving to Freedom 250. Some donors pulled back existing commitments, and some who have donated have asked not to be announced, fearing reprisal from the Trump administration. According to sources, prospective donors and sponsors have been told by the Trump administration that they do not have a green light to donate to America 250. Freedom 250 itself has conducted aggressive outreach to America 250's corporate sponsors, confusing donors who were not aware of the differences between America 250 and Freedom 250. Danielle Alvarez, a Freedom 250 spokeswoman, told the Washington Post that the report was nothing more than a partisan smear from politicians who would rather manufacture division than celebrate America's 250th birthday alongside the rest of the country. She also took a swipe at America 250 itself, saying the bipartisan commission had nothing.
You genuinely have to understand and appreciate how genuinely evil these people are. I don't say that lightly. If you've watched this video along with me, and you're not realizing that yet at this point, I don't know what to tell you. This is not normal. This isn't regular corruption. This isn't regular gray area stuff. This is incredibly manipulative, incredibly corrupt. These people are fucking evil people. Evil people.
Nothing to show for 10 years of planning, and the American people deserve better. But it isn't just Democrats saying that Trump's people at Freedom 250 deliberately obscured the difference between the two projects. Multiple musical acts pulled out of the fair when it became clear that they'd been hoodwinked into signing on with Freedom 250 rather than the nonpartisan America 250. The headliners were announced on May 25th, but within days, almost every one of them had dropped out, saying they didn't realize they were signing up to perform at a de facto MAGA rally. Martina McBride said, "I was presented with an opportunity to perform at a nonpartisan event, but that turned out to be misleading. I've been blessed with an opportunity to be a voice for those who have felt like they didn't have one. It greatly upsets me that any fan who has been moved by my music may now feel like..."
Just think about it for a minute. The 250th anniversary of our country went off on July 4th, and it just everyone kind of just glossed over it. This is the anniversary, 250th anniversary of our country. And when this effort was set up by Congress to put this event on, that was supposed to be bipartisan, you imagine what it really could have been. Could have been a genuine unifying celebration of our country, of its history, of the amazing talent and national treasures that we have in this country. I'm talking in terms of the artists that we have, of the like the art that we have, the musicians, the culture that we have spread across the entire country, the history, the legacy, all those different things, could have been a real big spectacle celebrating all of those different amazing things that make up this country. Because I understand, like, a lot of you that watch this, you are upset about where the country's at. But you have to remember, everybody that you love, everybody that you care about, all the great experiences that you have, all the places that you love, and those are things that are in this country. Don't let, these evil, disgusting people take that away from you. They don't represent all of this country. There is an element of this country that you have to remember that is where you come from, the things that you love, the experiences that you had, the friendships that you had, the family that you had, the artists that you love, the art that you've loved and appreciated, the culture that you've participated in. Those things could have been celebrated and they could have been highlighted. And it was all hijacked for this. And the 250th anniversary of our country is only going to happen one time. It happened already, and it's gone. When they talk about those memes, right? Those memes about, like, look at what they've taken from you. Look at what they've taken from you.
I'm abandoning the meaning behind those songs.
But actually,
Trump reassured the faithful that it would still be an epic show featuring the #1 attraction anywhere in the world, the man who gets much larger audiences than Elvis in his prime, and he does so without a guitar, the greatest president in history, the GOAT, Donald J. Trump, to take the place of these highly...
It's so corny. I can't even imagine, like, having this degree of narcissism where your narcissism is like like, people don't even actually like you. You have to, like, pretend that people like you. You have to tell yourself that people like you this much. It's pathetic. It's corny. It's embarrassing.
paid third-rate artists and give a major speech rallying the...
Like, if you're the kind of person that has to constantly tell yourself that everybody loves you, it's because no one actually, like, loves you. You have to keep convincing yourself. If you have to keep saying it, it's because it's not really true. You don't actually believe that. Nobody actually believes that.
Country forward like I have done ever since being president. And that...
If it was real, if people really liked you that much and looked up to you that much, then you wouldn't have to say it. It would go without saying.
Worked out great. And so, fans on the Mall never got to hear Martina McBride sing Independence Day, a song about a victim of domestic violence, abandoned by her community, who finally breaks free and burns down the house on July 4th with herself and her abusive husband inside it. But you can bet they heard YMCA, which is definitely not a gay anthem, and Creedence Clearwater Revival's Fortunate Son, an anti-war song often played at Trump rallies because no one on his team understands song lyrics or irony. It ain't me, babe. But speaking of culture...
I'm just curious, how are they even using CCR? Because it's hard for me to imagine that CCR would even give them licensing to use their music. CCR sue Trump? I wonder. No, not the Center of Constitutional Rights. It's probably other freaking lawsuits that have gone on with this unfortunate administration. Creedence Clearwater Revival. Frontman John did not sue Donald Trump, but he did issue a cease and desist letter in October 2020 to stop the Trump campaign from playing his anti-war anthem, Fortunate Son. I doubt that they abided by that.
Literacy, we would be remiss if we did not acknowledge that the message being pushed by Freedom 250 is explicitly one of Christian nationalism. Initially, America 250 received a grant.
Congress shall make no law towards the establishment of religion, and yet they're using all this funding to push their religion. And even if you are a Christian, right, it's their particular politicized brand of your religion. It's the whoring of your religion to abuse it to be used for their political aims. That's not a celebration of the United States, the kind of country that the United States is, that has religious freedom and that celebrates all the different religions, right? That's a political party weaponizing a specific particular religion while shafting every other religious group in the country.
From the Institute of Museum and Library
at our 250th anniversary of our country.
Sciences to launch 6 mobile exhibits known as Freedom Trucks to travel across the country throughout 2026, sharing the story of our nation's founding. As with so much of America 250's support, that was seized by Freedom 250 and turned into MAGA propaganda. The trucks feature content from PragerU and Hillsdale College. PragerU produces hilariously revisionist propaganda that seeks to whitewash American history.
I mean, it's not even hilarious. I get that she's not trying to, she doesn't mean anything by that, but it's not funny. None of this is funny at this point. It's disgusting. It's Orwellian. It's fucking evil. It's gross.
Like this children's show called Leah and Layla's History Adventures, where Frederick Douglass appears to endorse the Three-Fifths Compromise.
So in case you don't know, Frederick Douglass was a former slave who was freed, who was like one of the first like college-educated, my understanding, right? College-educated black men in America. And he is an iconic American figure because of, you know, what he represented in the time period that he represented it, and the ideas that he expressed and how influential he was despite his background, right? I mean, right here, right? He was the most important leader of the movement for African American civil rights in the 19th century. Social reformer, abolitionist, orator, writer, statesman. He used to have meetings with Abraham Lincoln. Am I remembering that correctly? I believe so, right? Frederick Douglass Lincoln. Yeah, Lincoln used to have him over, and there's a time period where people gave Lincoln shit for having, you know, an African American over like that. But Lincoln used to hear him out, listen to him, and take into consideration the things that he would talk about and say. I mean, Frederick Douglass actually influenced Lincoln, maybe I'm totally misremembering here. Outlived Lincoln by 3 decades. Well, yeah, of course, because Lincoln was assassinated. Frederick Douglass' influence on Lincoln. Frederick Douglass influenced Lincoln by relentlessly pushing him to make the Civil War a battle for human emancipation. So, like, if you know a little bit about history, of course, you know that Lincoln initially, the Civil War was, Lincoln just wanted to hold the country together. He wasn't trying to make it a larger thing about emancipation of the slaves and everything. But Frederick Douglass was one of the important people who tried to influence Lincoln to make it a bigger fight about the abolition of slavery, right? And you could see, obviously, that Lincoln eventually adopted that perspective and decided to make the Civil War, you know, part of the Civil War's objectives. You know, that would be part of it. Recruiting of black soldiers, demanding equality, shaping public opinion. So I just want you to keep that in mind, who Frederick Douglass is, before she says the next part of this, because I need you to understand how disgustingly evil these people are. Again, this is a former slave, a black man living in the United States during the time period of the Civil War, who advocated for the abolition of slaves, who tried to convince Abraham Lincoln to do so.
The southern colonies were dependent on slave labor, and they wouldn't have joined a union that had banned it.
Are you okay with that?
I'm certainly not okay with slavery, but the founding fathers made a compromise to achieve something great.
Hillsdale College is a tiny Christian school in Michigan.
And in case you're looking at that like, oh, well, he said he's against slavery. Yeah, but understand that Frederick Douglass never said those words. And they're using Frederick Douglass to say, well, you know, the founding fathers, they put slavery in place, but, you know, actually, you know, I might be against it and everything, but you have to understand, like, there was a compromise. They're using him to downplay slavery when Frederick Douglass was a former slave who spent his life advocating for the abolition of slavery. These people are evil. They're evil people.
Which situates itself as a counterweight to progressive education, recasting the founding fathers as fervent Christians and preaching the idea that separation of church and state is a myth made up by liberals. Unsurprisingly, this dynamic duo came up with content like an AI George Washington saying, "Our rights are a gift from God," a totally made up quote. They quote Thomas Jefferson as saying that
Jefferson and Washington were deists. I mean, they might have overlapped a little bit with Christianity, but they weren't devout Christians in the sense that their views were more in line with deism, which is they're kind of like spiritual. They believed maybe in like a supernatural, greater power, greater purpose, but they didn't specifically believe in the specific teachings of the Christian church. And yet the America 250, under the Trump administration thing, they were making up quotes by Jefferson and Washington to peddle Christianity as like the official religion of the United States anyways.
Slavery is a cruel war against human nature.
Even though Jefferson, by the way, specifically, explicitly said, like the phrase, a wall of separation of between church and state, that comes from Jefferson. And yet they're basically having Jefferson pretend that Jefferson had the opposite perspective.
Nature itself, without mentioning that Jefferson owned hundreds of slaves and impregnated a teenage Sally Hemings, a child who could not give consent. And there's a word for that, which doesn't appear in any of the Freedom Trucks. These exhibits launder totally debunked claims about the Continental Congress authorizing the printing of a Bible for use in schools. They omit the reality that Native Americans were forcibly thrown off their lands, or that the U.S. acquired huge swaths of the country from Mexico and Spain by military conquest. They even claim that Muhammad Ali renounced Islam later in his life, which he did not. And also, why...
What's crazy, too, is these are the same people who talked about not being able to remove Confederate statues because, oh, even if the history is ugly, we can't change the history. We can't censor the history. And here they are blatantly making up quotes by historical figures to sell their political project.
Why would you tell that particular lie? Ask yourself why the people pushing this version of America's history would need a great American like Muhammad Ali to be Christian. That's the kind of content that was on display at the Great American Mall Fair, too, along with bland palaver praising the Trump administration for its glorious feats of governance. That is what your tax dollars paid for, along with Rededicate 250, a national jubilee of prayer, praise, and thanksgiving, which took place in May. The event featured 18 Christian faith leaders, 1 Orthodox Jewish rabbi, and 0 Muslim, Hindu, or Buddhist clergy. Also, 1 in 5 Americans is atheist, and they weren't represented there either. But these events are not about celebrating all Americans. This is a story about real Americans that conveniently excludes more than half the people who live here. Trump and his minions at Freedom 250 are selling a story of this country.
That's the thing that I've been trying to impression upon people lately is that you can't say, these people can't genuinely say that they love the country when they show antipathy for half of the people who live in this country. If they don't like us because of the race or gender or the religion that we have, even though our country is a free country that supports the free expression of these things, how can they genuinely say that they genuinely embody the true character of our country? They don't. How can they say they actually love our country when they hate half of the country? They don't.
That excludes broad swaths of people and minimizes their very real contributions. These are festivals that glorify white Christians and put them at the center of our nation's story. And they're about one particular white Christian man who is celebrated over...
By the way, there's nothing wrong with white Christian people in our country. They're part of the story too, obviously. And not to say they're a large part of the story, right? There's nothing wrong with saying that. But at the same time, this isn't a ethno-state. This isn't a country that is only about those people. This is a country that has freedom of a religion, freedom of expression. We recognize that people have the freedom to choose the kind of lifestyles that they want to live, and that Congress shall make no law establishing a religion, right? This isn't supposed to be, our taxpayers aren't supposed to fund pushing only this group of people are Americans or represent American society and culture.
Everyone else, and who can demand tribute from companies with businesses before the government and use their donations to remake Washington in his own image and line his own pockets. And that is not a birthday present for this country. That's rewinding the clock 250 years and saying, you know what? We'd very much like to be governed by a mercurial monarch with absolute power. Nah, thanks, but no thanks.
Now, all this highlights why it's so important to get a great lawyer when you're dealing with your own case.
Well, yeah, you get the idea. So ad for Legal Eagles, defense fund thing, whatever. I won't go that far. I don't really want to watch that part, but I will say they make good content. Subscribe to them, support them in that regard. Yeah, a lot of grim stuff going on lately, but first step to any problem is recognizing that you have the problem. So I know right now is a time when people want to turn their eyes to it. It's tough. It's tough to deal with. Definitely go outside, touch grass. Remember that life is about more than these difficult situations that are going on right now. You only have one life to live. Go out there, enjoy it. Find people to love, find people who love you. Go experience the world. Go experience your life. Live your life while you can. Don't let it consume you. But at the same time, if we want to keep our country the kind of country that allows for that to be the case, where people can live their life and find love and, you know, enjoy their lifestyle in a free country, then we can't turn a blind eye to what's going on. And I need you to get outraged, and I need you to get angry, and I need you to channel that outrage to something that's productive. Not just get outraged, not just fall into self-pity, not just get depressed, but figure out what can you do? How can you get involved? Join an activist thing. Register to vote. Make sure that other people around you who are concerned about this stuff are registered to vote. Make sure that, you know, you're spreading the word on what's going on. Keep people informed. Look out for people around you, right? The anger, the outrage that we have over these things, they're only self-detrimental, they're only self-destructive if you don't do anything productive with it. If you seep in the outrage, if you seep in the despondence, and you don't look for ways to take that initiative, that energy, that motivation to do something about it. You are part of this country. You are part of the narrative of this country. This country is your country. The people in this country are your people. So let's fight for it. And I don't mean physical fight. I mean the ballot box, activism, speaking out about it. You know, that's how you show love for your country. That's what true patriotism looks like. And you can be part of that, and you should be part of that. So anyways, that's it for tonight. We end on a little bit of a sour note, but, you know, as long as we're here, there's still hope for things to get better. So don't give up on it. And I'll see you in the next one, okay? All right.